Hello, and welcome to the launch of Digital Technology and Democratic Theory, published by the University of Chicago Press. My name is Octavia Reeve, and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Ada Lovelace Institute, a London-based research institute with a mission to make data and AI work for people and society, the Stanford Centre on Philanthropy and Civil Society, and the London School of Economics Department of Media and Communications. In a few minutes, you'll be hearing from 5 of the authors of the book, moderated by Dr. Seeta Peña Gangadharan, Associate Professor in Media and Communications at the LSE and author of the chapter Digital Exclusion: A Politics of Refusal. While people are joining, I'll take you through a few points of housekeeping. We're delighted to welcome you here this evening. As usual in these virtual events, you in the audience won't be audible or visible during the event, but you can make comments using the chat. And please do ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, which Seeta will pick up and build into the discussion. There's a transcriber doing live subtitling of the event, and you can access those by clicking on the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. If you want to tweet along, please do so using @AdaLovelaceInst and your favorite hashtags. And finally, we are recording this session and it will be made available on our website. I can see most people have now joined, so I just want to say how absolutely delighted I am to welcome these 5 eminent authors on the subject of digital technology and democratic theory to share their insights about how technology is changing our lives as citizens and participants in democratic governments. To tell you that the University of Chicago Press has generously provided a discount code, which will be posted in the chat for those wishing to buy a copy of the book, and to hand over to Dr. Seeta Peña Gangadharan to introduce you to the panel tonight. So Seeta, over to you.
Thank you so much, Octavia, and thank you to the Ada Lovelace Institute for hosting this event together with Stanford PACS and the Department of Media and Communications at the LSE. I'm delighted to be moderating today's event with my fellow contributors to the edited volume, Digital Technology and Democratic Theory. Our format will involve a brief introduction to the book by Lucy Bernholtz, followed by Archon Fung, Hélène Landemore, and Bryan Ford, and then we will move promptly to the discussion portion of the event. And with that, I will begin with introductions and then kick it off to Lucy. Lucy Bernholtz is a senior research scholar at Stanford University's Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society and director of the Digital Civil Society Lab. The Digital Civil Society Lab hosts an online community and resources called Digital Impact that supports people and organizations using digital tools and data safely, ethically, and effectively to achieve social missions. Bernholtz is the author of numerous articles and books about civil society, philanthropy, and technology. She studied history and has a BA from Yale University, where she played field hockey and captained the lacrosse team, and an MA and PhD from Stanford University. Our second speaker is Archon Fung, who is the Winthrop, Laflin, McCormack Professor of Citizenship and Self-Government at the Harvard Kennedy School. His research explores policies, practices, and institutional designs that deepen the quality of democratic governance. He focuses on public participation, deliberation, and transparency. He co-directs the Transparency Policy Project and leads democratic governance programs of the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at the Kennedy School. He has authored 5 books, 4 edited collections, and over 50 articles appearing in professional journals. He received 2 SBs in philosophy and physics, and his PhD in political science from MIT. Hélène Landemore is Associate Professor of Political Science at Yale University with tenure. Her research and teaching interests include democratic theory, political epistemology, theories of justice, the philosophy of social sciences, particularly economics, constitutional processes and theories, and workplace democracy. Her research has been featured in the New York Times, the Boston Review, the Washington Post, L'Humanité, Le Monde, the New Yorker, and recently the Ezra Klein Show. Professor Bryan Ford leads the Decentralized Distributed Systems Lab at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, EPFL. He focuses broadly on building secure, decentralized systems, including privacy and anonymous communication systems, security, and blockchain technology. Since earning his PhD at MIT, Ford has held faculty positions at Yale University and EPFL. And with that, I want to kick it off to Lucy to share some background on the volume and our process. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, Seeta, and hello, everyone. I'm Lucy Bernholtz. I'm calling in from the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, and I wish to pay my respects to the traditional stewards and their elders, past, present, and future. I also want to thank the Ada Lovelace Institute and LSE for pulling this event together. It's great to be here with all of my colleagues again. My task is to talk a little bit about the aspiration of the volume writ large. It is truly an edited volume with chapters that speak to one another. And this was accomplished by actually working together. In 3 workshops over the course of 2 years, we learned each other's methods and languages. We argued over the meanings of democracy and technology, and we worked to find ways to write together across discipline and distance. The book is, as such, not a comprehensive look at either theory or technology. We chose instead to focus on inviting a deliberate mix of methods and disciplines and allowing the authors to focus on the pieces that were of greatest interest to them. This was done deliberately. It was done with an aspiration of expanding both democracy theory and who is seen as contributing to these theories. And all of it results in trying to put forth an agenda for future research. So it's a real delight to be back together with colleagues with whom I spent quite a bit of time several years ago to hear their reflections on their chapters and their current thinking. Seeta, back to you.
Thanks, Lucy. So with that, we will turn now to our speakers, beginning with Archon. And Archon, you and co-author Joshua Cohen take on the role of the digital public sphere, or the public square in democracies. Can you give us a sense of the specific aspects of digital technology that matter to the public square and the broader, bigger questions you address?
Let me unmute. Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Seeta, and to the Ada Lovelace Institute and to Stanford PACS for bringing us together. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So the contribution to the book that I participated in is a chapter by Josh Cohen and myself. And we try to answer the question of what would a good public sphere look like, one that is supportive for democracy. And a lot of the discussion right now, I think, in the press and in some academic circles is about like what we need to get rid of in the public sphere, like hate speech or misinformation or Donald Trump or not Donald Trump, if you read the Facebook oversight board decision. Ours is not really about arguing for a negative, but arguing for the positive, like what should a good public sphere do? And I'll just share just a couple of slides that are schematic that lay out the kind of outline for what we say. And so the main effort of the chapter is to kind of construct a normative yardstick about what the features of a good public sphere. And then what we do in the chapter after kind of constructing that yardstick is measure up 2 very different public spheres. The current digital social media public sphere, that's one. And the other one is the 20th century, late 20th century mass media public sphere, according to this normative yardstick. And so our yardstick has 2 different pieces to it. First, there's what we call a set of rights and opportunities. And you can think of this as the affordances of the public sphere. Is there free speech? Can people participate on it? How hard or easy is it to get information and good information out of it, right? Those are rights and opportunities. And then the second kind of category of the normative yardstick is the norms and dispositions. It's how we as citizens, as speakers, utilize the public sphere. And many of us, including, I think, probably a lot of the contributors to the book, in the early days of the internet, we were pretty optimistic about how good the public sphere would be for democracy. And I think everybody's had a sobering kind of set of lessons in the past few years on that. And one of the mistakes we made, I think, generally speaking, is we really underestimated how awful we are as people, as speakers on the public sphere. And so this set of norms and dispositions is meant to lay out some guidance about how we can be better people on social media when we participate in the public sphere, right? So that's kind of the structure of the yardstick. And so here they are. I'll just kind of tick them off, the different elements. But first, focusing on the rights and opportunities. The first one is the basic a U.S. First Amendment value, the right to free expression. People should have a right to express themselves freely in the public sphere. That one is really familiar. The others might be a little more strange, kind of unusual or distinctive, right? The second is people should have good and equal chances for expression, right? So, compared to the 20th century, I think the digital public sphere offers us a lot more, offers many, many more people good and equal chances to get their ideas out there, right? So if you think about the network era in which it was the BBC, 1, 2, whatever that dominated in Britain or in the US, the networks, you pretty much had to be a public official or a journalist trying to get your perspective out in the public sphere. And now lots and lots of different people can get their views out. It's a lot easier for Me Too or the Tea Party or the Movement for Black Lives to get its perspectives out in the public sphere than it would have been in that 20th century mass media world. The third criterion is access to good and reliable information. And here it's a little bit of a mixed bag in that I think if you want to look, there's much more good information available on the internet than in any prior time in human history. You could find tons of information about COVID or whatever interests you. The trouble is there's a lot more noise too. And so sometimes it's hard to get to that reliable information. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. The fourth is diversity. It's important in a healthy public sphere to hear a wide range of views and perspectives. And then finally, our fifth one is communicative power. And this one is the idea that in the public sphere, we exchange ideas and beliefs and values with each other. And in a good public sphere, one of the qualities of a good public sphere is that we can get together and act on those ideas. And we see that in some social movements that for whom social media is a prime medium on which they communicate and coordinate and project out their ideas. And then the second main category for us is the norms and dispositions, is how people should behave on the public sphere. And this part is really hard. I mean, our aspiration is that, everybody in the audience, everybody on the panel, when you engage in social media and the public sphere, you don't just do what's comfortable or what makes you feel good. You regulate your behavior according to norms, just like in a bar or in a park, you may have impulses to do all sorts of things that aren't necessarily polite or constructive or helpful to other people, but you should regulate those impulses and behave like a decent person. Similarly, in the public sphere. And so our three norms here about user behavior, first is regard for the truth. Right? Even we kind of retweet things, we amplify things, we say things, largely many of us, because they make us feel good or because they're funny or whatever. We think an important regulatory norm is that we should post things and amplify things with some regard to whether or not they're true, not just whether or not they make us feel good. And then the second one is a common good orientation. We should amplify and say things that are helpful to other people and try to bring society to a better place. And third is a norm of civility. And here we don't mean politeness, but we mean kind of a respect. Like if you say something in the public square or in the public sphere, whether it's in mass media or social media, you should explain yourself. You shouldn't just put it out there. You should explain yourself in terms that other people can kind of understand and get. And then it's also part of the norm of civility is it's incumbent upon you to listen to other people and to really try to get where they're coming from. And these days, I think this is kind of a controversial position because some people argue that it puts the burden on people to listen to very hurtful views and not just uncomfortable, but damaging views. And so I think that's something we should talk about. But we think that there is a norm of civility that requires us to at least try to understand other people and address them in terms that we hope will persuade them, even though they may have very, very different views and very, very different perspectives than we do. And so that's basically our structure. And then I talked a little bit about how we think the social media public sphere, the mass media public sphere stack up on those terms. And we can dive into that a little bit more later on in the Q&A if people want. All right, why don't I hand it back over to you, Seeta?
Thanks so much. Yes, a lot to dig in there. And thanks for setting the ground for our discussion. And then you delve into the connections between technological opportunities and democratic renewal. And I'm hoping that you'll speak about the promise, or can you speak about the promise of open democracy? And more specifically, these networked open mini publics that you talk about in your chapter.
Thank you, Seeta. So I, as the co-editor, I also wanted to just add a word of thanks to the authors and express my appreciation for their work. And I second Lucy in saying that this was a really rewarding experience. Sometimes there were frictions and misunderstandings, but at the end, I think it made the volume a lot stronger. And so I learned a lot from the experience, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So indeed, in my chapter, ever the optimist. So I try to take a positive outlook on the potential of digital technologies to help us reinvent what I see as a new form of democracy. I suppose I didn't want us to simply envision democracy as we know it, but online, or democracy as we know it, but augmented by digital technologies. But I really wanted to consider what's possible, like if we reinvented democracy from scratch in the 21st century, because as we know, democracy as we know it, representative democracy, was born in the 18th century under very different technological and epistemological conditions. I think that the main change that has happened between then and now, to me, is that we have the epistemology and technology for what is called collective intelligence, meaning we understand that in order to have smart groups, and in particular smart lawmakers, it's not enough to put the best and brightest in there. It turns out that's actually counterproductive to some degree. So, and it turns out that even though before, in the age of print, basically, it was really hard to collect feedback and gather, input from all corners of a nation state in particular. Now we can do that a lot more costlessly, not completely, but it's a lot less daunting. So if you think of Wikipedia as a sort of endeavor and accomplishment that was absolutely impossible before the advent of digital technologies, I think in the same way, what I call open democracy wasn't really possible until we had new epistemologies and new technologies. And so that's where I am trying to envision something different. And the main difference, I would say, so now I'll say a few words about the open democracy paradigm. The way I see it, perhaps arrogantly, is as a paradigm shift, if you want, a Copernican revolution. Instead of rotating around elected elites, my system is meant to rotate around the ordinary citizen. In fact, the ordinary citizens, because it's not just, it's a group. It's really authentically supposed to be a critical mass. So to express the vision, I guess I could give you the list of principles, participation rights, deliberation, majoritarian principle, democratic representation, transparency, and then ultimately, if we expand beyond the political and expand beyond the boundaries of the nation state, there are two additional principles, which are dynamic inclusiveness and substantive equality. But I think I'd prefer, in a few minutes, I have to give you a sort of a vignette that I put at the beginning of my chapter, which is this vision of a Greek woman, Angeliki Papadopoulos, who is a bed and breakfast manager, and she goes, it's the year 2038, and she's logging into her Citizen Book account, which is this global platform where communities can organize themselves online. It's a non-profit company that was formerly called Facebook, and she's able to communicate with all kinds of people in our community. So, for example, she's about to cast an online vote about some issue about which she has some doubts, so she can log in and in a deliberative room where she's going to encounter a random sample of people from our community to discuss some issues, so that she's not locked in a filter bubble. She can actually really have a complex 360 vision of a given issue with very different perspectives, and then go back and cast her vote. And if she's not sure, she can delegate her vote to her uncle, who's a marine biologist, if it's a matter of environmental issues or justice or something. So that's a model called liquid democracy, which is also something that's singularly possible online and via the tools of digital technologies. And then she receives an email from the House of the People in Europe, where she's a citizen, that invites her to join the so-called House of the People, 499 randomly selected citizens who are in charge of setting the agenda for the European Parliament. So actually, I'm not that bold in that chapter. I don't envision a system in which elected assemblies like parliaments, including the European Parliament, have disappeared. And I don't ask in this model the Angeliki to go and become an actual lawmaker. I'm getting there, actually, because of things that have happened since I wrote that chapter, and the experience with the French Citizens Convention for Climate, where citizens were in fact asked to become quasi-lawmakers. So it's really surprising to me that actually practice is going, is catching up with theory at such an incredible pace that even my little science fictional vignette is becoming obsolete quite fast. But so that's the idea, to look at the ways digital technologies can really empower the citizen and help him and her or them, access the center of power, which is ultimately the agenda setting power, the legislative power. So that's the idea. And the open mini public that Seeta kindly mentioned, it's this vision of a large randomly selected body of citizens that's connected to the larger public. It's not a closed off institution, through crowdsourcing platforms, through networks of other local mini publics that manage to sort of like bring all decentralized information to the center of the system, not quite on the Wikipedia model, which is quite distinct and specific, but inspired by the principles of openness and the idea that just as any one of us can go on Wikipedia and make an edit, write an article, contribute to an article, etc., we should be, as citizens, be able to just pop in and help fix, a flawed law or initiate a new one. And I'm out of time, so I'll leave it at there. Thank you. At that.
Thank you so much, Hélène, and for giving us that optimism. We'll move to Bryan, who I think has a balanced view, both optimistic and somewhat critical, or at least willing to point out challenges of digital technologies. And so, Bryan, in your chapter, you unpack the hard and technical problems of digital democracies and describe a layered relationship between these problems. What do you hope people will take away from your analysis?
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. So of course, I came to the book, to this project as a computer scientist, and in particular as a system builder. That's, really what my expertise is. And so I can't, I can't, even start looking at these problems without at least trying to solve them. And so that's kind of what my chapter tries to at least start doing, sketching out, what would an architecture look like for the kind of digital system that could actually, solve some of the, serious problems with current systems and make possible the kind of interactions that Hélène and Archon, for example, have been sketching out, right? How could we build digital systems that truly serve people at mass scale, right? A lot of my work focuses on security and privacy, and so from that perspective, I see a number of really basic questions, issues in our current technology that have to be solved in order to make these kinds of visions of true online digitally enabled democracy possible. We have to solve, one of the basic questions we have to answer and ultimately solve is, can we have true freedom of speech online without that enabling rampant disinformation and handing a megaphone to miscreants, profiteers, or would-be dictators, for example, right? In my view, this isn't so much a matter of balancing, say, freedom versus accountability so much, in that we really need both. On the other hand, a significant part of the problem is what we call an amplification problem, that misbehavior is not, can be amplified to seem like it's coming from thousands of people, or rather than just one abuser, right? So that's one of the basic issues. Some of the other questions, can we make exciting decentralized innovations like we've been seeing in cryptocurrencies, for example, but ones that serve everyone equally and bring benefits like financial inclusion to all without descending into a free-for-all of financial scams and Ponzi schemes, and that only benefit the technorati or wealthy or lucky investors, right? But ultimately, maybe most importantly, can we create online forums that support genuine democratic deliberation, of the forums that are really open and scalable, forums of the kind that Hélène was sketched out in her vignette, for example, that allow anyone to participate and even delegate in as in liquid democracy, or using other tools like that, but also be without being vulnerable to large-scale manipulation and abuse. And that's to me, as a technical person, surmounting that, the issue of security, vulnerability to manipulation, abuse, we're never going to get to this, point where we need to be at unless we can solve those problems. Now, I believe all these problems can be solved. And of course, trying to explore, what solutions to those might look like is part of the chapter, and it's somewhat partly a little bit halfway straddling technical and social, naturally. I'm not going to try to relate what the chapter says in general, but maybe just to start to give a flavor of the starting point. I feel that any solution to the larger issues of the disconnect between technology and people will have to start by solving the challenge that our entire technology ecosystem doesn't actually know what a person is, at least not in a secure and reliable, let alone privacy respecting way, right? So our technology ecosystem doesn't know how to distinguish a real person from one of thousands of fake online accounts or millions of bots in a big botnet, right? And that is where the amplification vulnerabilities and attacks come from, which is what's in our current environment, I feel the biggest problem actually comes from, not the lone abusers or lone liars or dissemblers, but it's the amplification factor of the people who figure out how to unfairly and unrepresentatively and unaccountably amplify their voice, this is a very hard problem. It's well known as the Sybil attack it's called the Sybil attack in technology circles. It's well known to be a very hard problem, partly because I believe it just doesn't have an all technical solution. Technologists like myself tend to like to look for clever cryptographic algorithms or, all technology, a magic algorithm or magic device that will just solve this. And I don't think there is one, because it's a problem that can only be solved by genuinely connecting to people and societies and creating a design, creating systems that are co-designed between people, between, the designers of technology and the people intended to use them. And so actually, solving these kinds of problems and, and coming up with the right solutions is in a way another venture that's going to require the kind of broad-based, communication, discussion, co-design, and collaboration of the kind that Hélène is talking about, not just by a few geeks in a dark room, right? And so again, I believe we can come up with solutions to these, and my chapter tries to sketch this. It also goes into the question, well, once we have this foundation, once we can securely recognize a person, how can we build the upper level, the upper layers of this technology stack, the applications to support things like communication, creation, propagation, and vetting of news, or large-scale online deliberation and self-governance on these foundations. So, and again, I won't get into the details, but I believe we have the basic technological tools to solve these problems. What I think we're still really missing are basically three things I see to make this actually work. We need more technical people willing to learn, study, and understand how their digital technologies affect people and societies, or should or shouldn't do it. We need more understanding among the general public and policymakers on what technical tools exist, what works well, what doesn't work at all. And how we can make these tools work in support of people and democracy. And finally, we need to work on developing the political will, awareness, and culture of placing society and democracy first in our technical designs and architectures. And so, in my chapter, I'm trying to illustrate how we can at least make a few steps toward doing that. And hopefully convincing at least a few people that it should be possible. And I will leave it at there. So.
Thank you so much. And thanks for sounding the clarion call for other computer scientists to get engaged in these issues. So we've just I mean, not everyone is coming out of the pandemic at the same pace as is happening in the United Kingdom or the United States. But we've now had more than a year of most things going online and of a form of digital democracy unfolding because of necessity, right? And so the question that I want to pose to all of you, Lucy included, is, in light of this, what, if anything, and I think actually Bryan and then you sort of started us on that path, what, if anything, might you adapt in the models that you've developed or in the analysis that you've, your affirmative framework that you've put together for this volume? Bryan?
Yeah, sure. I'll take it. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad you brought this up. I mean, I think the way the pandemic has forced so much of our work and discussions and deliberations, our whole lives online, in some respects has been a great thing for anyone with the program of trying to figure out how we can bring democracy online. It has really underlined the necessity of doing this, right? We can't even considering things like just voting in conventional elections, let alone new deliberative forms. But so it's become really clear that we need electronic voting, remote voting. We can't live without it, right? At least not safely, to our health and well-being in the context of a pandemic, right? On the other hand, it's in some sense it's a terrible, very risky development in that we know that our current methods of doing things like e-voting, e-democracy are absolutely not secure enough, right? At least not for the high stakes kinds of discussions and deliberations and debates that we really need to use them for, right? Again, I feel like the solution, the potential solutions are there and achievable, and we are seeing in some quarters kind of greater interest and urgency and will from both the technical and policy sides to try to figure out ways to solve some of these problems and make online voting and related technologies more secure and more powerful. But unfortunately, what we're stuck with right at the moment is basically being forced to use a bunch of band-aid hacks that could totally fall apart at any time and or be kind of seriously misused at any time. So it's a really big outstanding risk and threat and potential threat, while also having the beneficial effect of, in some sense, forcing us to move forward. So it's hard to balance the risks from the benefits there.
Great, thank you. And then Archon, Lucy, and while I'll just interject really quickly to say, if you have a question, participants at this stage, please go ahead and start posing them in the Q&A function.
So if anything, this pandemic and the fact that we are all online now and, teaching online, having faculty meeting online, my kids having their piano lessons online now, it's just makes me, in a way, more optimistic that something like an open democracy is doable, including at scale, because yes, it has its limitations and we'll never be able to fully replace face-to-face meetings, but cost-saving aspects of this, the time-saving aspects of this, the convenience aspects of this are amazing. So I personally hope we never go back to the world of before. I hope we stay in a sort of hybrid system where we can partly do stuff online, partly do them face-to-face. And so when I think of Angeliki, right, my heroine, who I made move in the story. Once she's invited, she starts selling her stuff and her sofa, and I thought she would have to move to Brussels for 4 years. And I'm thinking, well, actually, no, she probably would just have to rent a small place and be there a few weeks a month, and maybe not always, and come back. And in fact, that's exactly what happened with the French Citizens Convention for Climate. For those of you who haven't heard of it, it's an experiment where 150 randomly selected citizens were brought together to make quasi-law proposals on how to curb greenhouse gas emissions in a spirit of social justice. And initially, everything was supposed to take place physically at great cost in a Iéna Palace in Paris. They brought people from all over France. We also have representatives of the ultramarine territories, so extremely costly to bring people. And because of the pandemic, halfway through it had to switch to online meetings. It wasn't ideal. Some of the meetings were not as good. But anyway, there was so much work to be done that they had to include Zoom seminars in the intersessions anyway. So basically, nobody believed that it was possible, but it turned out that they had to do it, and it worked. So I think that makes me more optimistic about the feasibility. That said, I bracket completely the security issues mentioned by Bryan. I just trust that he will fix them someday, and that we can indeed vote and exchange and deliberate in a safe and secure way. But I'm also optimistic that this means we could have global deliberation one day, because like for issues of climate change, for example, there are activists and academics who are trying to convene a global climate assembly, and for years funders were not interested in funding something that was online. They wanted face-to-face, very costly, very complicated. With the pandemic, they're willing to fund an online virtual pilot, which is going to take place in this coming fall in the margins of the Glasgow COP26. So it has changed the game completely, I think.
Great. Lucy, you have some thoughts to share?
I'm laughing because I think the audience will now see some of the differences of opinions that shaped the writing of the book. No one has ever accused me or complimented me by saying I'm an optimist. So I'll just jump in here. I have a very, very different feeling about what we've learned over the last 13 months. And let me compare it kind of oddly, but just to a paper I just read yesterday, which actually really, it was like an Escher drawing. And I feel like the last year has been an Escher drawing. So the paper is by Dan Bauk and Dana Boyd, and it's called Democracy's Data Infrastructure. And it's about the US Census, and it's a remarkable, the paper does many things remarkably well, but what it really does well is point out how for centuries in the US, this critical part of our democracy, which is required for both allocation of funding and allocation of representatives, is a terribly flawed process and document, biased and discriminatory from the get-go through 2.5 centuries of different stuff. But by constantly focusing on the statistical, technical challenges of reporting on the undercount in the census, we've successfully distracted everybody from the fact that the larger project doesn't really do what it's supposed to do. And that in an age of pervasive, very small amount, very granular amounts of data on everybody, this has become a real problem because of privacy and aggregate concerns. The point being, I think pre-pandemic, the nice to have nature of our dependence on these digital systems was more in the front of my mind, and the ability to create these possible hybrids more in my mind. And what I've experienced over the last 13 months here in California and globally is that all of that nice to have stuff we shouldn't take another step forward to it until we can guarantee things like regulatory structures that make sense, access in a way that allows people to participate. And that means everybody, not some people. It's not okay to have some people left out, just sort of the entire infrastructure and the way in which the pandemic has made so painfully visible the way we've been papering over these discrepancies. I find it unconscionable to think about continuing to focus on the nice to haves when the digital systems are both already so critical to our ability to do anything, not just communicate, but anything. And they're just not designed that way. They're literally not thought of as infrastructure. They're not regulated as infrastructure. They're not available to people. They're not. So the chasm is just enormous. And I think for me personally that my chapter in the book is about associational life and new kinds of organizing ways. And I just think the degree to which we've been focused on an assumptive of access and agency and security and safety, it's just not, we can't build from here until we address those core infrastructural recognitions and also go much beyond the idea of the internet as a communication space. It is fundamental infrastructure for every social and civic function in modern life. And it has to therefore be designed and thought of in that way before we go to the nice to haves. So.
Good. I just have a couple of thoughts just to add on to this rich discussion. One is, I think, in 3 or 4 years, communication people, maybe some politics people, the pandemic, digital communication on the pandemic will be like transformed in terms of what we consider interesting questions, right? Because like when people are looking at social media, they're thinking, oh, it's the business model or it's the algorithm or it's the news feed. But in Zoom, I mean, there is a business model, but that's not doing the communication work. And it's certainly not advertising that's doing the communication work. It's a whole different social graph than Facebook or Twitter, right? But it is different from face to face. And so what is that doing to communication, right? And it just like the Zoom space is a little bit more like the WhatsApp space, which people weren't that attentive to, which is really, really different from the Facebook and Twitter space, right? And so it just shows like the contingency of what we count as important on structuring our digital communication is totally different on Zoom. And I think we just now, I don't think anybody's really begun to ask really deeply what difference that makes. But, just like a couple of differences, I don't know about you, but the talks I'm in and the talks I go to now compared to the pre-pandemic world have about 20 times as big audience. Because you don't have to be on campus to go to a university talk. You can be having lunch somewhere in Brazil and, it's a topic that interests you. And so that's a transformation that changes the accessibility of information and the accessibility of some relationships and communication. I don't know what it means, and I don't know how much of it there is, but just that certainly has occurred in the academic world and certainly in the politics world as people are doing more of their relational work and organizing in this pandemic year necessarily on digital media. I think it's made a big difference, but I can't characterize for you what the nature of that difference is. So that's kind of one point, and people will look and it'll be super interesting what they find, whatever it is. And then the second thing is, I think that the John Stuart Mill proposition on social media, right? That the marketplace of ideas will generate, something better, something more can tend toward the truth. I have a fair amount of optimism about that. I know I fully recognize that it's a mixed bag. But like looking at the pandemic in the United States early on in the pandemic, one thing that was absolutely true is that the statistics just about how many people had COVID and how many people were in the hospital were just not being gathered in any systematic way. And it was a crowdsourced project called the COVID Tracking Project that went to each individual site and cranked those numbers every night. And then we got to begin to get a national picture of it. And the fact that we could get a national picture put a lot of pressure on health authorities and state governments to be more transparent about the reality of COVID. And then the New York Times and the Atlantic and other people picked up that source and then professionalized it. And so it's that social media interaction that in the early stages made possible social knowledge about how bad the pandemic was in the United States. That's exhibit one. Exhibit two is the initial mask guidance from WHO and CDC we know was like a horrible, tragic mistake. And it was social media conversation, some famous people like Zeynep Tufekci, but many others challenging those official positions of authorized scientist experts that forced, I believe, well, anyway, was coincident later on with a course correction later on. And that's, you know, pretty significant. And we see several things like that. Epidemiologists, especially on the West Coast, early on in the pandemic saying, hey, look, I've done some gene sequencing and putting on Twitter. I think it's already reached a level of community transmission when everybody else from Andrew Cuomo to the CDC to Gavin Newsom was saying, hey, you know, we got this under control. We got it. Let's keep it out of the country in China when it was already here. And it's social media that created avenues for those dissonant voices and positions to articulate themselves and challenge the official position, which happened to be quite wrong at each of those instances. Now that goes along with the anti-vax and the misinformation and, you know, the dark side of it. And I don't, you know, it's hard to weigh up how those two compare, but I don't want people to lose sight of the ways in which the information sphere did generate dissenting opinions and and perspectives and facts in a quite constructive way over the course of the pandemic.
Thanks. I'll just add very quickly, because I feel like it is worth sort of highlighting the range of perspectives that are in this edited volume. And just to say really quickly, as somebody who writes on technological refusal and thinks about how members of marginalized communities are really, both concerned and constrained and interested in challenging sociotechnical systems. In terms of the last year plus, I think it only amplifies for me the ways in which, yes, we do need some of these affirmative, both the theories and the models, right, to help us understand how to invigorate democracy and make democracy accessible to more people, but also how we have to think about undesigning, undoing technical systems, not settling for coercive technologies, which seems to have been a pace in the last year and a quarter. So I'll just stop there because we have a question from Robert Ford who says, isn't the basic problem one of cultural values, human behavioral norms, and social political control systems where unhealthy norms can't be or are not able to be controlled easily without basic agreement on basic ethics focused on quote unquote openness rather than quote unquote power and control, which is the norm in political systems today?
I don't know. I mean, that's such a huge question. I think there's a lot of norms that work in different political systems. And I think it's a moment of flux. It's early days for these digital technology, for the pervasiveness of these digital technologies and structuring communication. And we're creating norms all the time, right? There was a story in one of these podcasts. Somebody was kind of hounding Jack Dorsey about some speech thing, the CEO of Twitter, the creator of Twitter. And finally, Jack Dorsey responded. He said, okay, I'll have coffee with you. I'll listen. And the guy said, well, what did you get out of your coffee with Jack Dorsey? And he said, well, what I walked away with was he just does not want to be the arbiter of what's sayable and not sayable on the internet. He set out to create an app to connect bike messengers to one another so they could talk more easily. And now he's in charge of the global public sphere. That's not something he wants to do. And clearly, Mark Zuckerberg, in creating the Facebook oversight board, right, he wanted to outsource. He doesn't want to hold that responsibility. So that's like an example of in which these people find themselves having a huge amount of power. It's not like they don't like power. I mean, who doesn't like power? But they've been burned so many times by the exercising that power in ways that cause a lot of backlash because they're bad decisions. And at some point, it's better not to make those decisions, to have somebody else make those decisions. And that's an opportunity to inject some norms and some structures about how they could be made in a more fair and democratic way. And so I do think these norms are very quickly evolving, as well as the practices in the institutions.
Lucy, Bryan, and then we have just 2 minutes or so. And if you want to just chime in with either a response to this question or some concluding thoughts, that'd be great. Yeah, Hélène.
I think the question is saying something that I agree with, which is that it comes down to also politics and power, and who gets to define the norms and who gets to shape the rules, and so it's not really just a question of technology only. We as a society, as a community, get to choose what norms we encode in our algorithms and what preference get ranked in what way. And so I think that's absolutely true, and that's why we wrote that book, to put in a conversation democratic theory and the technology, instead of just focusing on one or the other as if they're not constantly shaping each other. I just also wanted to react to something Archon said about the way technologies have sort of really changed the way dissent can be expressed and all that. I also think, going back to teaching, I think teaching on Zoom all day actually has changed also the dynamic in the classroom, not in bad ways necessarily, because when you lecture in a large lecture hall, you only see the front row, and only the front row really raises their hands, and it's certain kind of people who dare to speak in a large group, and I find that there's an equalizing sort of dynamic to these little squares that we're all sort of framed in now, and I noticed gender dynamics shifting subtly, and racial dynamics shifting subtly in rather positive ways. So I'm with you, Seeta. I was completely convinced by your general observations about silences and exclusions, and the infrastructure in itself is exclusionary as of now. And I'm with you, Lucy. I agree that technically we should move on and go further until we fix the problems. But for one thing, I think people will move forward anyway. I just don't see it being stopped, unfortunately. So there's almost a sense in which we have to make the best of what's going on and try to catch up, basically. And then I think, again, because I can't help it, I just see the positive in this, and I actually saw a lot of positive things in the ways we've used technologies this past year, despite the utter misery of everything else.
Great. I just want to, I think that ending on a positive note is a great idea. I want to thank all of the speakers, the panelists, and to thank Ada Lovelace Institute for hosting again. And a reminder that the discount code, I've put it in the chat, for the book is DTANDDT at the University of Chicago Press website. And I do hope you take the opportunity to engage. It's been really wonderful with all of you joining us today to talk about digital technology and democratic theory. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.